Welcome to From the Mind of Christine McConnell. In today's episode, we're going to be tackling the cap of the canopy bed. So this is actually the very last step of this bed, and if it is done well, hopefully guests will feel like they're sleeping in a beautiful confectionery box. The first thing I'm going to tackle is mocking up the shape that I'm going to be creating a lid for and getting all of my measurements. Inside the corner of each of these little areas, there's this little nugget from the post that sort of sticks and juts out. And I'm actually going to have to create a special measurement just for that because I don't want to remove that. I'm just going to have to sort of work around it. So as far as I know, this is not something you can just outright buy. And if you paid somebody to do this, I don't even want to think about how expensive that would be. But the truth is, a lot of the materials don't have to be too pricey. And so if you're going to tackle this, I would strongly suggest just doing it yourself. And so anyway, the very first thing we're going to do is create a framing where our lid is going to rest. The way I'm doing this is just taking a simple molding from the hardware store, and I've measured everything, figured out the angles that things are going to need to be cut at. And now I've just gone up to the attic and I'm cutting out all of my pieces. I don't know why, but it was really difficult to sort of do the math on how these all came together. But once I had figured it all out, I was able to start nailing things in place. To really reinforce the frame of this, I had added some more support plates on the interior, and what problem that's creating for me now is there's kind of not a smooth flat surface for this corner piece to get sort of wedged into. And so I'm just going to take my Dremel tool, prepare it, and then see if I'm any closer. All right, so now that we have a ledge for something to rest on, we're going to create the foundation for the cap. The foundation is just a sheet of plywood that's, I think, about 1/4 inch thick, and I didn't have a vehicle big enough to transport an even bigger slab of it, so I purchased 2, and I'm going to be cutting these up and melding them together to create just the right shape. I'm now just cutting out some little corner pockets so that this thing will rest in there nice and snug. And then it's back up to the room to see if I'm getting closer to a perfect fit. Okay, so that cut didn't actually quite work out. So now I have to do it again and run back down those stairs. Finally, it fit absolutely perfectly, and now I can start measuring out the other end of the bed. All right, so both corners are looking really great, and now I've got them kind of overlapping, and I'm just marking one of them, and I'll cut off whatever that excess is. To fuse these two pieces together and create some real strength, now I am cutting down some 1x2 inch board. And once I'm feeling like they're in a good position, I'm going to actually start screwing them into those thin plywood sheets. Once I had some preliminary screws in, I took it downstairs where it was going to be a little easier to work on. After adding some cross bracing, I flipped it over and then I just started adding as many screws as possible because I did not want this thing to ever come apart. To find the center of this board, I just took a string and went from one corner across to the other corner. And then once I had drawn a little bit of a line, I flipped the string to the other opposite corners, and that was the quickest way to find the exact center. The base is looking really good, and so now I'm just going to sand those edges, get them nice and smooth so no fabric catches on them. And then once that's done, I'm going to drill a hole out through that center. Before we get into the fabric, one more thing I want to do here is tint and stain that ledge that we added so it has plenty of time to dry by the time we need to actually set something on top of it. Anytime you combine two different types of wood, they're very prone to take stain differently, and that's what's happened here. So obviously the ledge that I've created doesn't match. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my airbrush paints and create a tint. The reason I love these airbrush paints so much is because of the transparency that they offer, which just makes them so great for a million different projects. Thankfully, this doesn't take very much time, and once I'd reached a color I was really happy with, I just went almost like a wash over all of those ledges, and it very quickly took and looked perfect. After it was dry, I locked it in with an oil-based polyurethane. To figure out how much fabric you'll need, I went around and I measured the full perimeter. I took that number and then I doubled it. When I was done though, I realized that was kind of too much fabric. And so honestly, 1.5 would have done it and it would have been less pricey. Once you have measured out all the fabric that you want, you take the two ends and you just sew them together and you create basically a gigantic circle. After my circle was complete, I had some thread on a string. I chose one side of the fabric and I just started gathering it probably every 3/4 of an inch. So I'm making a mistake here and I'm not going to realize it until later. I am not using thick enough thread, and when you do that, it's prone to pop once you start adding tension. So you really want to use something like upholstery thread, something really sturdy and difficult to break, and that will save you a huge headache if you tackle this. Once I was done gathering the entire circumference of this circle, I started tightening it very slowly and very carefully. It's now finally time to fuse our fabric to the board, and the way I'm going to do this is that little circle that we screwed out of the board. I'm going to center this little kind of donut of fabric around that, and then I'm going to take a brad nailer and secure it in place. For this step, you really can't have too many brads, so feel free to just go hog wild, and that's exactly what I did. To measure this all out and ensure that I've got equal amounts of fabric in every section, I went around and measured all of the fabric, divided that number into 4s, and then I took binder clips and just clipped each of those 4 points right into the center of each side. Next, I found the center of each of those little quarters that I had just created, and then I pinned that into the corners and then just kept breaking it down by half every section. And this way you ensure that this thing is going to look really even all the way around. To lock this into place, I'm using very shallow staples. I think they were only about 1/4 inch long because you don't want anything to come jutting through the other side and become visible. The more taut your fabric is, the better the finished result is going to look. So you do have to use quite a bit of elbow grease to pull it as tight as you need before stapling. I would also say that if you use a fabric that has a little bit of a stretch to it, it's gonna probably look a little better in the end, just because I think you end up with something that looks a little bit more uniform. And as usual, I've got a problem. Anytime I tackle a new project, there's always some unexpected hurdle that pops up. And in this case, I did not measure that diagonal measurement from the center to the corner. And what's happening here is I'm coming up short. So the way I'm going to address this is I'm going to have to create sort of a decorative little embellishment here in the corners. And it's the nature of tackling new things is you end up with unexpected problems. But thankfully, this is one I can solve. Once the edges were all fastened down, now I had to go back into the center, tighten everything up so it was as secure as possible. And then I just spent a little bit of time going out and working out all of these gathers to make sure that they were all as smooth as possible. On the backside, all I needed to do was trim away any excess. All right, I am loving how this is starting to look. It's really hypnotic for some reason to stare at. So now I'm going to create a cover for the center and covers for those corners that didn't fully get enrobed in fabric. The way I'm going to do this is I'm just taking a piece of paper, folding it in half, and then drawing a design on just one half of that corner. And then once I've done that, I can actually fold it back again and cut out a perfectly even shape. To create a design that's going to go right in the center of the board, I'm taking one of those corner pieces, placing it on a paper that I have folded in fours, and I'm just finding my favorite little part of that, and from there, creating kind of a star-like shape. Once the paper was cut out, it was as simple as placing it on a plywood sheet, tracing out that design, and then from here, I'm just going to take a jigsaw to cut out these little adornments. After they were cut out, I just took my Dremel with a sanding bit and smoothed out all of the edges. Okay, the shape's cut out so beautifully. And now to give this just a little bit of a pillowy effect, I'm going to add a layer of felt and then top that with a layer of satin. The color won't matter, so I'm just using a Sharpie on the felt because it's going to be the easiest thing to see so I can cut out. To ensure that the felt wasn't going to move around on me at all, I hot glued it in place. Okay, so now for the really tricky and hard part of this. The way you're going to bind your fabric in a pretty looking way to these adornments is you're going to use a little tiny bit of hot glue and you're going to glue down the points first. And then you work down from those areas. And the reason I do it like this is If you try to start joining it from the sides, once you get to the points, you can end up with little ripples and distortions. And so this is a way you can avoid doing that. Once the points have all been secured, now you need to go around and just cut out a bunch of relief cuts and then start gluing those little tabs down. And this is something that is going to look like a mess until it's done, but when it's done, it does look really beautiful and seamless. Once everything was glued, you do start to see like a couple little things that don't look quite perfect. And so the way I fixed that was I just took some thread, and anywhere that I saw a bit of like a pucker, I just stitched right through, pulled it through across to the other side. And it went a long way towards securing everything and made all of those edges nice and smooth. The way I did the centerpiece is identical to everything I just showed you, only this one took what felt like a million years to do. Somehow I forgot that I needed a small little hole right here to actually affix this thing. And so I'm having to cut that in after the fabric was applied. So I needed a small dome, and all I had on hand were these little silly plastic googly eyes, and they ended up working out perfectly. I'm not exactly sure where I fall on the hoarding spectrum, but it seems to be this really perfect sweet spot where if I need something bizarre and obscure, I'll have it somewhere in the house. The way that I'm covering this dome is I'm putting a little bit of hot glue on the inside, and then I'm just going to pin down 4 corners and then just work into smaller sections. After those 4 points were secured, now I'm just taking a needle and thread and just adding tension and tightening it until it comes to a nice smooth dome. I now want to put a little bit of braided trim around the dome to kind of really make it look finished and professional. The only issue with this is how do you join the 2 ends, because you don't want something that looks blunt and sort of silly. So the way that I'm doing this is I'm actually cutting open the braid a little bit, using some Fabri-Tac right on those edges, and then very slowly I'm actually going to start braiding the ends into one another. This part was pretty fiddly and took quite a bit of time to sort of get it to a place that I was pretty happy with it. But once I was there, I just took a needle and thread and secured it. I'm now just securing that braid on with a little bit of hot glue. In order to mount this medallion to the bed, what I've done is I've looped a wire through the backside, and then on the front, I've just slipped that right through a washer, and then I'm pulling it back again, and then I'm going to twist this back nice and snug. So basically it's not going to come undone or move around on me. And then just to add a little bit more security, I'm going to hot glue that washer down flat. Just a little bit more hot glue to seal on that button, and then we are ready to slip these pieces into place. right, it is all finished and it looks so dreamy to me. I have been waiting for a big canopy bed my whole life, and I'm just gonna have to keep waiting for a little bit because this is the guest room bed. But it was really fun to learn how to do all of these things. And so when in the future I tackle another canopy bed, I'll have this entire arsenal of information at my disposal. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I cannot wait for you to see the projects that are coming and in the works. So until then, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you again very soon.